My sister is a sociopath. It took me a lot of years to realize this and stop rationalizing it. I'm a diabetic and have been in comas. During the last one in 2015, after a year of no contact, she showed up at the hospital saying I had expressed to her that my wishes were do not resuscitate. About 12 of my friends shouted her down and I woke up 3 days later on my own. If I had coded during that time, however, there would have been a lot of gray area around if they were allowed to revive me. About 4 months later she took out a life insurance policy on me and asked me to sign it. I said no. I no longer speak to her. I dated someone who I now believe is a sociopath. The most uncomfortable thing while we were dating was that he would constantly whisper things in my ear in public, in earshot of other people, like, "Do you think I look hot right now? Or do you think I'm cool?" And the first few times I thought he was joking, so I laughed, and he'd get angry. He wanted a serious answer. He wanted me to tell him how much I wanted to jump his bones right there in front of all of our friends, while they were watching and listening. I'd get lectured afterwards like, "You know, you really insulted me personally when you laughed at me in front of everyone." He could also cry on cue to get what he wanted, and as soon as he got what he wanted, it would instantly switch off and he'd turn very serious and tell me what a horrible person I was. The instant emotional switches are disarming. When he broke up with me, I went from being his favorite person in the world to instantly at the very bottom of his list. He laughed when I cried on multiple occasions, calling me ridiculous. What's very alarming about people like him is how many people they can get on their side with their charm. None of his current friends know anything about his behavior behind closed doors. And they're all new people. All the people who caught on when we were dating are gone from his life. He has convinced his new friends that I'm a psychopath because I tried to tell others what happened. So whenever I say anything about what a creep he is, I get brigaded by the new people who are now being manipulated. Also, he is completely dead in the face and eyes, until you interact with him, and then it's like he becomes animated. I was making some brownies. My sister was visiting for some reason. Maybe it was Christmas. Anyway, I like my brownies gooey and hot, so I'm cutting into them a little earlier than I should. Sister flips out and starts beating on me, grabbing heavier and more dangerous weapons from whatever she can reach, pans, rolling pins, etc. Becomes a scuffle where she keeps screaming, "Stop hitting me!" while all I'm doing is grabbing her wrists to avoid taking one to the head. Maybe it's not the most uncomfortable she's made me or the most evil thing she's done, and she's done worse to people we aren't related to, I know. But when people ask why is your sister so crazy, that's the memory that comes into my head. Her gigantic freak out over brownies that I was making. Someone replied, "I've encountered something like this before, and it was equally bizarre to see for the first time. It was college. I shared a suite with 3 roommates. I was in a side room and one roommate and a visitor were in the main one. The 2 involved had minimal prior contact. The visitor, female, blew up at the roommate, male, over a minor annoyance, in this case his peeling packing tape off a roll. I guess it was too loud or something. Literally in about 60 seconds she escalated from these weird irritated whine growls, to demands for him to stop, to insults, and then it was suddenly hitting, kicking, scratching, threats, like a full-on tantrum. Anytime that he did anything to defend himself, putting his arms up, grabbing at her wrists, pushing her back, she would start screaming in pain and saying things like, "Stop, how could you do that? What's wrong with you?" And saying it like she meant it. Everything she did was way out of proportion with what was happening in reality. Crazy. The moment I made my presence known, she detached herself from the encounter, made a frustrated sound, and stomped off. Barely an hour later, she's back like absolutely nothing happened. I've been long-time friends with a sociopath. He is honestly like my brother. We have developed this relationship that basically treats me like his moral compass, but it doesn't always work. He is still manipulative and cruel at times, and he does only truly care about himself, but he tries to be a good person because he doesn't want to be a butthole. This being said, my most uncomfortable moment with him would have to be when he was telling me about watching some guy almost die. He was telling me how he knew he should have stopped watching and helped him. But he was too interested in what the outcome would be if he didn't help. It was creepy to know that as hard as he may try to be a decent person, sometimes he still can't help himself. He once tried to manipulate me to come in and work basically 50 hours, 10 of which would be off the clock so that I didn't get overtime, because he knew that if he could keep labor low on his shift he could get a promotion. He would also expressly lie to my face about giving me a break, saying verbatim, "I'll come back here in a moment and take over, so that you can go on break," then he would just never come. Then when the time has passed to where a break would be irrelevant, i.e. 30 minutes before my shift is over, he'd offer again. I have a friend who's a pathological liar. He's also mostly Scottish in heritage, northern Scotland, where the Viking influence is. He's 6 feet 8 inches, 350 pounds when he's watching his weight, 400 plus when he isn't, and there's a lot of muscle to go with everything else. The lies aren't all that awful most of the time. He's known as a very entertaining storyteller and everyone knows he'll embellish greatly from time to time. But he can't keep a girlfriend, apparently he can't be honest, is a pathological cheater. The lies catch up with his relationships in a few weeks at most. One day we were in a taxi together and he got the idea that the driver was taking a route that was unnecessarily long. He stopped the cheerful story he was telling me mid-sentence. His face changed and he barked at the cab driver in a voice I'd never heard, loud and angry and aggressive. The cab driver immediately pulled over and let us out without paying, and a good thing too. I think my friend was about to kill him. I was petrified in my seat. I felt like he might kill everyone in range. I was terrified. It was the last time I spent time with him, though I had known him for 20 years. I later learned that he won't associate with someone after they've seen him snap, as one of his other ex-friends put it. In high school, my boyfriend at the time and I shared a math class together. It was well known we were dating, so I would always take him his homework via teacher's request if he missed. He skipped a lot. I broke up with him over Christmas break. He cheated on me. Math teacher obviously still assumed we were together, so he asked me to bring him his homework. I did. Got to his house, wanting to drop it off at his doorstep. He told me to come in and explain it to him. He locked his bedroom door and started saying stuff like, "If I can't have you then no one else can, I could get you back in a second. Just admit it," etc. Then the true kicker, "If I killed you or if you died, I would keep your body in my closet or hung behind my door just to have sex with it." Disclaimer, I never had sex with him and I think that killed him. He then proceeded to try to make out with me and jam his hands down my pants. He actually thought it was endearing and had no idea why I was so upset. I got out, called my mom to pick me up, and ran back to the school. He lived close. Terrifying. To this day I'm still horrified about it and him. Last I heard he was trying to be a magician, looks like Charles Manson, and is in and out of psych wards. Someone in our extended family. He offered to kill my cat for me to save a vet bill. The cat wasn't sick. Or old. He was just very enthusiastic about helping us out with that particular issue. He's not allowed to be alone with pets anymore. But this wasn't the first incident. At a family gathering he took the family dog for a walk. He returned with the dog soaking wet. It was December, and he claimed the dog had chased a squirrel into the river. People didn't entirely believe that story, somehow. He also tends to just leave gatherings without telling anyone, sleeps in the garden instead of on the couch, and he rarely blinks. He is just altogether a little odd. My brother is a sociopath, as well as a homeless heroin junkie. For the most part he stays hidden from view and away from my family. During his active times where he comes around looking for money from family members is the most uncomfortable, because when he doesn't get it he resorts to burglary. Having to leave home not knowing if you'll be burglarized is stressful. I wish he would just go to prison already. It would be so much better for everyone. I married one. Last straw was the day I caught his reflection as I passed by. Pure evil and hatred in his eyes. I told him I was leaving the following week. He said, "If I ever see you somewhere with someone else, I won't say a word to you." I said okay. He then added, "I'll just walk up to you and shoot you in your pretty face." I was moving some things out and looked under the bed for a pair of shoes. Found his guns, fully loaded and out of their cases under his side of the bed. I went to the cops. Nothing came of it. Fast forward and he remarries before the ink is dry on the divorce. New wife shoots him in the head and kills him in his sleep. Proceeds to kill herself with his pain pills. Yeah. I sleep better these days. My uncle. We found out things in bits and pieces. My dad and he worked together. He got my dad fired by saying all sorts of lies to their boss. And then pretended to be the white knight by offering him a job in another country where he's living. Money was tight back then and we were in a lot of debt, so dad agreed. He took him there, gave him work, but also made him a slave to his wife and kids who also lived there. Dad was expected to cook food, wash the dishes, clean up the dining table after uncle's family ate, and then eat himself. Yes. Dad didn't tell us until much later. According to the rules set by uncle, he wasn't to contact us often, should mind his own damn business even if his daughter didn't turn up home all night, and keep his mouth shut about work. Dad was miserable there and we couldn't do much because, again, that job was a welcome relief to us. Uncle, meanwhile, would come every night to our home, have breakfast and dinner that my mom generously cooked because his family was abroad, while bitching about my dad in front of us. One day I had finally reached my breaking point and I started crying because I felt horrible for Dad who was trying so hard to make things right for us. Uncle just sat opposite to me smiling. Goddamn smiling. We'll never forget that psycho grin on his face. Days later Dad suddenly turned up unannounced at home. Turns out he'd been dumped by Uncle to our city without prior notice. Dad had no guts to tell us what happened. We realized Uncle was a psychopath later. He'd routinely mentally torture people and enjoy their misery while pretending to offer sympathies and help. He's in a powerful spot so he offers his victims jobs. Once they accept, he makes them entirely dependent on him. He'd then put his victims under even more psychological stress, be it threatening to cut off ties or getting them fired if they disagreed with him. My dad was really messed up for days. He'd swing from utter despair to not speaking for days to extreme violence to absolutely broken. Got beaten up a bit for trying to calm him down. Dad could finally regain his mental sanity after we cut off all ties to that uncle. Last we heard, he wants to contact my dad because their brothers and people realized what a piece of human excrement he is, so they avoid him too. Dad's like, oh hell nah. I remember from a very early age that my mom would just stand in the entrance to my room with a knife. This didn't happen very often, maybe 2 to 3 times a year. When I was 9, I finally asked her why she would do this. I'll never forget how she said this. She looked me dead in the eyes and said that I was a mistake and she was deciding if she should do what she should have done a long time ago. I asked to move in with my grandma a week later. Thinking about how she said it still gets my heart racing 22 years later. I don't know if I can accurately describe it, but every single hair on my body stood straight up. I was paralyzed with fear and I felt like if I moved too suddenly she would strike. Backstory: Mom had me when she was 16 and regularly told me that I ruined her life. She was a habitual drug user and alcoholic. She told me that if she had the money she would have had an abortion. I dated one a bit over a decade ago. He fits the description of a sociopath more than a psychopath, but he's also narcissistic. We dated in high school for a little over a year. Aside from the constant gaslighting, lies, manipulation and threats, he was basically a bad person who warped my mind so much that I actually believed I'd be nothing without him. Whether driving erratically with me in car when I questioned him, or threatening physical violence on me and my family if I broke up with him, he was truly terrifying by the end of our relationship. The absolutely most uncomfortable and terrifying moment was when he put a loaded hunting rifle in my face. He was addicted to weed. I don't believe weed's a dangerous drug at all, but he was so psychology warped that he believed he was going through severe physical and mental withdrawals if he went a day or two without smoking. One night he decided he was going to rob a small convenience store in his town for weed money. I stepped in front of his door to block his path and he pointed the gun at me. I bravely broke up with him a few days later, blocked him on social media, wouldn't answer his calls, and wouldn't answer the door when he showed up to my parents' house. It took months for him to get the point that I was serious. 12 years later and I still have nightmares of him. My sister feels nothing but rage. When she doesn't feel rage, she feels, literally, nothing. She spends her life manipulating everyone around her and satisfying that rage. She mercilessly abused me growing up. She tried to kill me 3 times before I moved out. No one believed me. Because I was older and larger, I was always considered to be the aggressor, even when I was being violently assaulted in my sleep. Living with her was a nightmare. The most uncomfortable moment between us wasn't something she did to me. It was something I considered doing to her. I'd been sent up to the crawl space to get an ornament. You could only access it from a ladder in the garage. When I grabbed it and turned around, she was at the top of the ladder, staring at me. There wasn't any room for her to come up, she was just waiting there. Staring. She told me to get out of the way, and I told her I couldn't. There wasn't room for 2 people in the crawl space. She'd have to go back down the ladder. She immediately switched to rage. She said she hated me, and she wasn't going to let me down from the crawl space. It was 110 degrees in there, and I was already exhausted. I remember thinking, she's at the top of a ladder. Over a cement floor. I could make this stop. I'd just say it was an accident. I'm only 12. No one would convict me. As soon as I thought that, her face suddenly went blank, and she went back down the ladder.